A quest is a search for something. And every week, the Quest podcast will show you how we know what we know through interviews with people that have incredible stories of dedication and perseverance. I'm your host, Todd Fischer. Join me in this thought-provoking and inspiring podcast of discovery. Find us anywhere you listen to podcasts. Hi, everyone. Welcome to the No Earthly Explanation podcast. I am the producer of the podcast, Todd Fischer, and with me is Don Schmidt. Welcome to the show, Don.
Todd, it's a pleasure doing this with you. I've been involved with so many programs in the past, and a show would often, be contingent on how good the producer was. The producer would not only book the guests, but they would serve as the referee. But they're working behind the scenes, and they don't receive the credit they should truly, receive. And I, for one, am tipping my hat to you and for filling in Brittany's absence today. But we need to do this because of a subject very timely, something that's on everyone's mind right now, as to what's going on with all the balloons supposedly that are, traversing throughout, our airspace here in the United States.
For sure. Yeah, it's funny. I only really pop on to these episodes when there's a Q&A episode. I seldom am involved, in any other aspect of the on-air part of this. But today I am filling in for Brit Barbieri. So she's off on a project right now, so she can't make this episode. So I'd love to step in because you and I have had many of these conversations on our own privately for 26 years now, or however long we've known each other. So somewhere along those lines.
20, it's going on. I'm looking at a plaque on my wall that I received from the very convention that we first met at, and that was Dragon Con. And so we're going on 27 years, my God. Yeah.
And folks, just so you know, we're only 34 years old. So we've known each other since we were really, really little.
As we were crawling, we were already, talking sci-fi.
We got to make a cartoon called Roswell Babies,
Roswell Babies, right. Like you have, you have different shows that have had longtime family members, and it's, transcends down from generation to generation, and they become this particular baby and that particular baby. So yeah, we're going to have no earthly explanation babies. Yes.
Right. Well, I hope, I wish we were 34 years old again. That would be a lot of fun. But anyways, let's get on to today's episode. So, you're right. We did have to do a timely episode because I believe the last episode that came out 2 weeks ago was the UAP report. And then literally days after the UAP report, we're now getting balloons knocked out of the sky like crazy, like we've never seen before. So let's kind of dive into this for a minute. If this is coincidental or, if there's something to this, and just to kind of fill in the audience a little bit, the first one that really made the news was the Chinese spy balloon that was going across the country that seemed like every day that was the news story and why we weren't shooting it down. So I think we first heard about it when it was over Montana. It wasn't shot down until it was over the Atlantic Ocean off the coast of South Carolina. Correct. And, so I guess credible enough evidence to know that this was a Chinese spy balloon. I'm not really clear right now whether the Chinese are saying it was or a weather balloon or a special project.
They pretty much have acknowledged that it was just a standard weather balloon on their part, and it's just that it got away from them. It got caught up in the jet stream, and it came in off of China and then up through Alaska, up through the Bering Straits, through Alaska, and then down through Canada, and then came down into Montana. And as you described, it was allowed to essentially get moved throughout the entire United States. And what I find as far as the first red flag, the first sign that they were not being upfront, that the Pentagon / government was not telling us the truth, when there was a press conference and it was Brigadier General Patrick Riley who said that, well, the reason we're not bringing it down is out of concern for people, that we are, very, concerned about where we would bring this down, and we just don't want to hurt anybody. And that's after it's traveled through hundreds of miles of unpopulated area through the central part of the country. And so we knew that was not being totally honest with the American people, with the American media. And then the questions about why are they permitting this if they accept that it indeed is of Chinese design, and it has propellers and it has solar panels on it. So it has a specific mission, and we're allowing it to travel directly over very sensitive nuclear strategic air commands, such as in Montana. Why are we allowing this? And that those questions still remain unanswered. After now 2 weeks, we still are not being told the truth as to what the mission was on the part of the Chinese, and why our own Pentagon allowed this to happen.
For sure. And since that balloon, we've had the Lake Huron balloon, which was shot down over Michigan, and the Alaska balloon, and then the Canada Yukon Territory balloon.
Yukon Territory.
Yeah.
And then for the Pentagon to acknowledge as of yesterday that they have called off the recovery operations, specifically for the one in Alaska and the one in the Yukon in Canada, that they are irretrievable, that they are in such rough terrain, that how convenient in that we will call off the recovery operations. Well, why did they think of that when they knew full well where they were bringing these down? The same as far as over Lake Huron, that they would bring it down over a body of water, and that they would potentially eliminate the chances of recovering the actual balloon.
Right.
In other words, it's like it's all staged. It's all to ensure that there would be no balloon or any remnants of any balloon or any other object that could be presented to the public. So there again, they are generating more questions than they are providing answers. And how typical of the government.
For sure. For sure. Yeah. Very odd. Of course, the Canadian government did ask the U.S. to shoot down that balloon, which I also thought was really interesting. But for me, obviously, when this started to happen, there's going to be a million conspiracy theorists out there. I mean, these things could be balloons that were launched from high schools in the science class. Like they could be things that simple. But one of the things that really, I think, bothers me about this is the precedent that's being set, that many of these objects are being shot down before they've been identified, at least from what we're hearing.
Right.
And is that a danger? Shoot first, ask questions later. That's worked out so well in history, right?
And as it turns out, it's like killing an ant with a 45 pistol, a 45 caliber pistol. We're using F-22s, we're using F-16 fighter planes, and we're using Sidewinder missiles to take down what a single bullet prick would bring down, if indeed these are all balloons. And I'm not suggesting that they're anything more sophisticated than balloons, not for a second, but we only have visual and video of the Chinese spy balloon, the first one. We have nothing of the subsequent three. We only have the government's acknowledgement that they were tracking these unknown objects that were coming in once again from Alaska. And the one shot down over Alaska, the other one over the Yukon Territory of Western Canada, and then the other one over Lake Huron. And then we only have the pilot's testimony that has been, again, released by the same government. We don't have any of the pilots available for comment or answering questions. And so we're taking the Pentagon / the government's word for what took place.
Yeah.
And just like the two F-16s that were scrambled out of Truax Airfield in Madison, Wisconsin, to bring down the octagonally shaped balloon, as it was described to us, over Lake Huron. We only have the word of the government. We only have the word of the Pentagon. And even those two F-16s, if not for people on the ground, that when they returned back to Truax and noticed that each fighter was missing a Sidewinder missile, we would not even know that it took two of them to bring down this one lone balloon.
Yeah.
And now that it's a hobby group down in Illinois that is claiming responsibility for that balloon, that $12 balloon nonetheless.
Yeah.
And we spent close to $1 million to bring it down. Just absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Insane. You know, I get the thing about airspace rules and things like that. Like even small hobby drone enthusiasts have to abide by certain rules when flying a drone. You know, you can't fly them too high. You can't fly them near airports. There have to be lights on them. There's a lot of things that you have to do. And at the beginning of kind of the drone movement with hobby enthusiasts, you actually had to get a license from the FAA to even be able to fly drones. I don't think that's the case anymore. I think commercial flyers of drones have to get those FAA licenses, but balloons are sort of out of control now in kind of the private world and the educational institutions and also in kind of big companies. These days, you never know if someone's going to launch a rocket or a balloon someplace and what the ramifications of that might be. But supposedly we have the technology now to see these balloons like we didn't before. So a week before the UAP report, we couldn't see these things, but now we can suddenly, the government has the tech to see these things, right?
And yet, as any meteorologist, anyone who is familiar as far as with any of the corporations that daily launch balloons, the military themselves, the National Weather Service, there are over 150 balloons that are launched each and every day. And with the expectation that once they are launched, you will never see them again, that they will rise to a certain altitude, the helium will take them as far as up into the jet stream, and they're not shot down. They just are forever lost. Some will even travel so far as they'll get caught up, and they may even orbit around the planet a number of times. As long as the helium, as long as the upper winds keep them aloft. But that all of a sudden now they become a threat. All of a sudden, it's as though we're dealing with a surprise balloon attack. And the fact that, and here's the most curious thing, Todd, that it was the Pentagon, it was the government that immediately labeled them UFO. And some, like the spokesperson at the Pentagon, actually acknowledged that we may be dealing with aliens. They may be extraterrestrial because we can't identify them. And it's like they're testing the waters. They're seeing just how much of this tripe, this dribble, the public would believe, would accept. Well, the public didn't accept it. It was the mainstream media that then took it to that same level. And they too were using the term UFO. It wasn't the UFO community. It was the government / military and the mainstream media.
Yeah.
So they were the ones that were perpetrating this false flag. It was not what the media would call the tin hat crowd, not by a long shot. And there too, much to the credit of the American public, they were accepting that these were nothing more than very prosaic, very conventional balloons that are up there every day. And just as though overnight, they were playing this up to serve as some new threat. Well, it was actually a diversion, a new distraction. And all one has to do is look at what's in the news at the moment, and they're diverting all attention away from anything that may damage Washington, the politicians in Washington, and what's going on at the Pentagon.
For sure. Absolutely. I like you use the term false flag with it. I like to use the term misinformation sometimes for things like this. I believe back in one of our first episodes in the first season of this podcast, I had statistics for the amount of reported UFO sightings and how they're kind of bulging now, bigger than ever. And that was over a year ago when we launched the podcast. Now reports are up even more. And I think that one thing that's really fascinating about these balloons, I think the Chinese balloon is the only one you could see from the ground. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, that was the only one.
Talking about that earlier. It's the only one that we have any actual ground visual. Everything else, we're just taking the word of the government, even saying there were 3 other objects. And now for them to conveniently say, well, we're calling off the retrieval, the recovery operations, because the terrain is too difficult. Or it's over Lake Huron and we'll have to wait, maybe it'll wash up someday.
Yeah.
Again, it's too contrived. It's like it's scripted. It's professional wrestling all over again.
Yeah. The nothing to see here aspect of this. I think it's interesting. You flood the market with so much information like this that you'll never find anything truthful in all that. And I think you have to do that when you really want to cover something up. You flood the world with so much misinformation that no one has the time to sort through it all. If there is one real Chinese spy balloon, let's say that the other 3, there's now 3 more balloons. We don't know what they are, So I think it's an interesting way the government approaches this.
Well, and playing off of, again, the gullibility and the ignorance of the general public, but again,
and their fear.
And their fear. And that's it, exactly, Todd. They will play up the fear element because that's where they will get the greatest and easiest compliance with the public, with the local politicians as far as to take their marching orders, and by playing up that fear. And that's what they tried to do with this, that these balloons were somehow a threat.
Fear is a great thing. Oh, good.
Go ahead. No, please.
Well, I was just going to jump in. The aspect of using fear to control people, we've just seen this happen with COVID. And I'm going to tell you an interesting story about Dr. Fauci. So a lot of people don't realize this, but Dr. Fauci was at times very important in the medical community. And really one of the most important times that Dr. Fauci was active, like he was through COVID, was during AIDS. Right. And the thing is that the only way that you could really instill how bad HIV and AIDS was to instill fear in people. And that fear campaign worked. You had to scare people into thinking they were going to die of AIDS and they needed to stop doing certain things that might contribute to AIDS spreading. And that campaign worked. So where there could have been millions and millions of lives lost, instead there were only hundreds of thousands of lives lost. And what Fauci did was he replicated that campaign for COVID. You had to terrify people, lock them into isolation, make them get, their shots, their immunizations, to keep it from spreading. Because where we did have deaths as a result of COVID, there could have been far more deaths. So the fear aspect, those fear campaigns do work in a way. The scary part of this is what is this fear campaign for? Is it for a looming war with China? Is it an invasion from people from the other side of the galaxy? What do we need to fear this time? I'm curious.
Or, and I pointed this out in a number of interviews during this last week, that through the course of the balloon situation here and in Canada, these last 2 weeks, there were 5 that I'm aware of, spy balloons, Russian spy balloons that were shot down over Kiev, Ukraine. And I saw the pictures, and you could see the corner reflectors, and these are typically used in deflecting radar and causing ground-to-air missiles to go off course. But nonetheless, it will cause you to fire more at something that, once again, the most minute forms of defense mechanisms would be necessary. But what you're basically doing is you're putting very economical, very cheap hardware over a populated area, and you're causing them to expend their most expensive firepower, their air-to-ground missiles, their ICBMs, to bring down something that you are spending thousands of dollars on the dollar to bring down. So it's tactfully, it's very smart.
Yeah.
And is that what's happening here? Because we have now to date, we have used now 5 expensive missiles at the tune of about $400,000 a piece. And then we're using, if you figure just the airtime alone, like an F-22 fighter, it's $85,000 an hour, and F-16 is $25,000 an hour. So we're talking upwards of $1 million over this recent panic attack over a bunch of alleged balloons. So what are they preparing us for? What are we getting ready for? Is it going to be an EMP attack? Is it just testing the waters as to what the public accept, they believe? And does it become part of their playbook, their agenda? And that's what, as you point out, Todd, we have to be all the more vigilant over, all the more concerned for the future. What was this a dry run for? What are they once again preparing, not us, but seeing just how gullible, see how far the American people will go? What is that level of fear that they need to achieve before we once again fall in lockstep and we listen to exactly what they tell us to do?
Well, Don, we've been talking about these balloons and other things for nearly an hour, so we should probably wrap it up. So I'll do the Brit Barbieri wrap up.
Yeah.
I'll try to do her closing justice. She does such a good job at it. But first off, No Earthly Explanation. You can find us on Facebook or Instagram at those handles. You can get our podcast nearly anywhere that people subscribe to podcasts: Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. There's a million of them out there. We're on right now, so definitely tune in to listen to our past episodes, all our future episodes. And you can find Don at Don47Tom on Instagram, and you can find Don on Facebook at Donald Raymond Schmidt, and you can find me out there all over social media everywhere under Metatomics. Just type that in. I pretty much own that word these days, so you can find anything I'm working on or doing through that for sure. But Don, this has been a lot of fun. I hope we get to co-host together again in the future.
Oh, I have no doubt, and you're always invited, and even to offer your commentary and your questions through the course of a regular show between Brit and myself. You're always welcome.
For sure. All right. Well, we'll do this again soon.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you so much for filling in for Brit. And the next time, Brit and I will be back once again looking into the phenomenon that defies conventional explanation. And join us for another episode of No Earthly Explanation. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hi everyone, I'm Todd Fischer, the host of the Cult Following podcast. Cult Following is a podcast that studies the personalities and common traits of cult leaders and their followers. Get the real story behind these infamous and oftentimes tragic cults from a new perspective through exhaustive research and from interviews with people that were there. Available anywhere you listen to podcasts. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Please be sure to rate and review this episode. This podcast is produced by Todd Fischer and Anthony Smith and is distributed by Metacortex Publishing. This podcast is copyright. Any previously trademarked or copyright content is used by permission. Information and opinions stated in this podcast should not be construed as medical advice. Please be sure and visit the official website for Metacortex Publishing at metacortexpublishing.com or find us on social media for other unique content.